HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Sway by Matthew John Bocchi. Read by Timothy Andrés Pabon. Introduction. I was 8 years old when my father invited my younger brother Nick and me to his company Christmas party at Cantor Fitzgerald. The bash was held at the 105th floor of One World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, where my father had an office. Ironic that he worked so high up, given his fear of heights. Most people forget that for a brief moment in history, One World Trade Center was the tallest building in the world. According to my mother, my father was obsessed with the disaster movie The Towering Inferno, the fictional story of the tallest skyscraper in the world set ablaze, destroying the building and killing many of those trapped inside. Early in the party, my father walked us to one of the narrow, floor-to-ceiling windows and stopped several feet short. He pushed us ahead of him. "Go on," he said. "Look down." Nick and I put our noses to the cold glass and tilted our heads forward and looked. "We're 1,200 feet up," he said. "You feel it?" "What?" I asked. "Look at the people on the street." What I saw were dark specks moving along the sidewalks, a group of specks crossing the street. The cars appeared like toys. "What?" I said again. Then I felt it. A slow, rocking motion. The building itself swaying in the wind. 1. As a boy, I was oblivious to the push and pull of global forces and extremist ideologies, and everyday dickmongers who couldn't control their urges, and how oxycodone and Xanax and cocaine made everything better, until they didn't. On the other hand, I knew how I felt on September 11th, 2001, and the days that followed, and how those feelings solidified or expanded, or whatever feelings do after years of rumbling around inside a body. My father, John, met my mother, Michelle, while they were both working at a law firm. My mom was a secretary and my dad worked in the mailroom. They were friends until one day my dad showed up in Brooklyn where she lived. "I'm in Brooklyn. Do you want to go to the movies or what?" he confidently remarked. He took her to see Commando, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Soon enough, my dad proposed to my mom at Windows on the World, the restaurant on the top floors of the World Trade Center. 2.5 years later, they were married. My dad was told that he wouldn't succeed on Wall Street because his last name ended in a vowel. Turns out a man born from poor Italian immigrants didn't garner respect from the waspy types. "We'll see," he said, and eventually worked his way up from the mailroom to the top of one of the biggest brokerage firms. Eventually, my parents had 4 boys of their own, me, the oldest, Nick, Michael, and Paul. Paul's birth completed our family in June 2001. They had everything they wanted. My dad was successful at his job as managing director of interest rate derivatives at Cantor Fitzgerald, and even had his favorite sports cars. Most importantly, they owned a beautiful house, rather a home, to raise 4 young boys, and life was content. But it wouldn't last for long. My brother Nick and I attended Harding Township Elementary School, a public school, and a good one, I think. 15, 16 kids to a teacher, pre-K to 8th grade. I was a 4th grader, Nick a 2nd grader. Around 9 o'clock on 9/11, the superintendent of schools, Dr. Marino, stuck his bald head in my classroom, scanned the room, then walked in and whispered to my teacher, her back to the room, all hush-hush. Marino was a good guy, a hint of a smile perpetually plastered on his face. He was a disciplinarian when he had to be, but even then, you weren't mad at the messenger. You got caught was all. When my teacher, Ms. Lewis, pointed at me and another kid, Sam, and motioned us to the front of the room, I was pretty sure we'd been caught. For what, I didn't know. Miss Lewis was young, early 20s, favored sweaters with high collars. She was likable, though sometimes unsure of herself. She glanced at Dr. Marino and then at the door, hesitant, mulling over whatever goes through the head of a 4th-grade teacher, and finally walked Sam and me to the door. Behind me, I sensed Dr. Marino stepping forward, saying a few words I didn't catch, warming up for what I was sure was a catchy monologue about keeping the playground free of M&M wrappers. When we arrived at the corridor, standing there was the second-grade teacher, Miss Green, and my little brother with a concerned look, but still smiling, a gap showing between his two front teeth, and Sam's younger brother, Brett. It occurred to me that Sam and Brett's father worked in the same building as mine. Ms. Green, it seemed, was in charge, and she led our little troop to an empty classroom 4 doors down and waited until we boys had all taken seats. Then she spoke. She assured us that both of our fathers were safe. I looked over at Nick, who stared back. "Nothing to worry about," Ms. Green said. "Really." "Why are we here?" I asked. Then she told us there'd been an accident, or not an accident exactly, or she wasn't sure. Forget that part. An airplane had crashed into one of the towers, the North Tower. Her voice was higher than usual, strained with lots of pauses, searching for the right words. She told us the authorities were evacuating the building. Nothing at all to worry about. Even as she spoke, I wasn't fully paying attention. I was sneaking glances at Nick, his dark hair combed straight up into a kind of inverted cone, his shirt buttoned right up to the neck. I thought about the pilot, the kind of trouble you'd get into for flying into a building. Ms. Green glanced at Ms. Lewis. In hindsight, these two were just a couple of kids a year or two out of college. Not really grown-ups. Not yet. "Any questions?" Ms. Green said. It wasn't really a question. Even at 9, I knew the difference between a question and a statement, and this was a statement. "You have no questions, am I right?" Sam shook his head. Brett, too. Brett was a thoughtful kid, narrow face, crooked teeth, the kind of kid you wanted to pat on the back, tell him it would be okay, even if you knew otherwise. Miss Green waited. I shrugged, turned to Nick. He shrugged back. Then, abruptly, we were escorted through the door into the corridor and back the way we had come. My 4th-grade classroom had windows into the corridor. As Sam and Brett and Nick and I ambled past, every kid in the class stared at us. We were on display, sort of like zoo animals, the stare suggesting they knew something we didn't. In the back, I saw my best friend give me one of those big, toothy grins. His name was Connor Fitzgerald, but everyone called him Fitzy. He waved, his hand close to his chest, kind of hiding the gesture. Up front, Dr. Marino was wrapping up, rubbing his hands together, smiling at his audience of 9-year-olds. We arrived at another empty classroom, the computer room, as it was known. Each of us played the computer game Gizmos and Gadgets for what seemed like eternity. After a while, we returned to our classrooms. For the next few hours, the kids in my class just sat there doing nothing. Ms. Lewis did her best to get us back to normal, but her heart wasn't in it. Even if it was, every few minutes the door opened, a mom stormed in, spotted little Patrick or little Claire, and off they went. One by one, our classmates were taken out of school. Even Sam and Brett were eventually plucked from their respective classes and carted away. By lunchtime, it was just Nick and me, him in one classroom, me in another. At first I wondered why we had to stay in school. Then I got angry that we were the only ones left in school. Whatever was going down, I wanted out. I had a bad feeling. An airplane crash, evacuation, lots of blubbering mothers snatching up their kids, grabbing hold of tiny wrists and not letting go. Our father worked in the World Trade Center. If anything, we should move to the front of the line. Eventually, Nick and I climbed on the school bus. The boxy thing was empty. Not a soul except the bus driver, a heavy man with sad eyes, Nick, and me. The bus driver motioned us to hurry along. We sat, 2 small kids in the same seat, eager to get home. A mile and a half, and 5 minutes later, we got off the bus at the end of our street and began the walk up the hill to our house. I could see that the normally quiet street was filled with cars. As we got closer, I saw that our driveway itself, and even the lawn, were jammed with cars and SUVs parked at odd angles. The setting looked rushed and chaotic, like a crime scene on Law and Order. Our house was big and white, likely some version of colonial, rectangular, symmetrical, lots of double-hung windows with small, equally sized square panes and green wooden shutters. If the original colonial house was a single clapboard-sided box, then ours was the upscale New Jersey version. 4 giant boxes connected, the boxes turned this way and that, all of it sitting in the middle of a massive green lawn. There was something wholesome and patriotic about it. We even had a flagpole out front flying an enormous American flag. We walked in the back way, through the garage and into a long hallway. At the other end of the hall was the living room, and I could already see it was filled with people. Aunts and uncles, and grandparents and neighbors and other people I didn't know. A few steps closer, I saw my mom's cousin, who I called Aunt Anne, talking to Grandma Laura. And there was Hamilton, a former colleague of my father with some degree of sketchiness about him, leaned against the doorframe. I stopped at the kitchen door and saw Fred and Kathleen from across the street, and Margaret, Daisy, Hannah, and some others, all friends of my mother's, standing around the kitchen table. Everyone amped. No one sitting for some reason. In the TV room, Mrs. O'Brien sat on one of the plaid couches, scowling at the television, the sound as loud as it would go, along with a dozen or more other people watching the news footage of airliners colliding with the towers. Mrs. O'Brien was the mom of a kid in Nick's grade. Every few moments, she'd turn away and tighten her lips, angry and willing to show it, wanting to show it. She'd had enough news, but lacked the oomph to get up and move on. When I looked at the television, I saw a person jumping, floating ever downward, and eventually the towers collapsing, the South Tower, and seconds later the North Tower. I learned later the towers didn't come down within seconds of each other. Instead, the South Tower collapsed at 9:59 a.m., with the North Tower a half hour later at 10:28. Not that it mattered. To me, it all came crashing down in one fluid motion, one then the other. In addition to the footage of the planes and falling towers, I watched other images, a collage of video and photos, each more unthinkable than the last. I saw people running away from the collapsing towers, and a woman fall or jump from the building. Why would she do that? Doesn't she know the firefighters are coming to save her? I heard the newscasters talking over and over in a loop. When it ended, the loop started again. Many of the people in the living room were on the phone, some dialing my father's cell phone, others calling hospitals throughout the tri-state area. In the kitchen, I heard people dialing hotlines set up to identify and locate missing family. I watched Nick walk away from the TV to join them. I stood and stared at the TV. He'd be okay, right? My father way up near the top of the building, a building that no longer existed. But he'd gotten out, right? He was alive, right? He'd be home soon, put on a big smile, shake some hands, and then shoo all these people out of our house. Or we'd all have a party, eat, celebrate, I didn't know what. Someone turned the channel. An uncle, I think. On screen, I saw the North Tower still standing. A woman's voice in the background saying something obviously devastating has happened, though her sources couldn't say exactly what. Old news. What I saw was a gaping hole in the building. Thing was, I knew that building, knew how ginormous it was, and that stupid hole was what? Only 5, 6 stories tall? Maybe 5 times that wide. I'd been up close to the tower countless times, knew the architect's name, something Yamasaki. I'd also been on airplanes a bunch. That chasm in the tower wasn't caused by a Cessna or a Piper, or even one of those enormous jets, a Gulfstream. I saw the opening, but no sign of the airplane. The tower had absorbed it, swallowed it whole, and for a moment, the tower looked even bigger, the gash smaller, inconsequential. Then the loop continued, and one tower came down, then the other. There had to be a way out. No way he didn't get out. I needed him to get out. He needed to come home. I knew the kind of person he was. Smart, resourceful, a man of character, a man for which everything eventually panned out. He found a way out. I was sure of it. Hell, not only did he get out, he carried injured people down flights and flights of stairs. In my mind, my father was a hero. Grandma Laura, my mom's mom, had Nick by the arm, and she pulled him toward me. She told us to go over to the Kelly's house. Noah Kelly was my age, and I often crossed our backyard into his and knocked on his door. Grandma sort of waved at the back lawn. "Go on," she said. "They're expecting you." "I want to wait," I said, meaning wait for my father to get home. "It's going to be fine. Go play." It was warm outside and windy. As Nick and I trudged across the backyard, I wasn't all there. I was dreamy, absent-minded. I was in shock. I'd seen the news footage but didn't believe it. In a way, I didn't believe any of it. I repeated to myself, the Twin Towers were too big, the airplanes too small. All those people didn't really jump. The towers didn't really collapse. That our entire family and friends, and a few strangers, had gathered at our house comforted me. They were adults. They'd work it out. They'd find him. They'd convince him to come home. Only he didn't come home. Not that night. The following day, Wednesday, people flooded the house, arriving early, filling every room with noise and speculation and lots of crying. Nick and I took turns calling my father's cell. Someone had left the old Panasonic cordless on a small table in the foyer. I grabbed it, dialed, got my father's voice telling me to leave a message, so I did. "Hey, Dad, it's Matthew. Please call me when you get this message and come home soon. I love you." I handed the phone to Nick. "Your turn." We left one message after another, begging him to come home. If Wednesday was weird, Thursday was weirder. People, some strangers I didn't know, showed up at the front door, knocked, and walked right in. The mood was lousy, and each newcomer only made things worse. Some nitwit turned on the television, and we all stood around watching the same people saying the same things, the same images in the same sequence. Airplane crash, smoke, building collapse. Over and over. I remember staring dumbly at the television, the sound off, the soundtrack provided by the voices and conversations throughout the house. I singled out my mom talking to someone in the other room, telling whoever it was that they'd find him. No way they wouldn't find him. They'd dig him out. A pause, as I imagined whoever it was nodding or frowning, or both. Then she said he'd come home. Others repeated her words, the part about digging him out, and each time I heard it, I sensed a smidgen of conviction slipping away. What struck me was the consensus that my father was somewhere beneath all that steel and smoke and throat-choking dust now on the ground. I didn't think my dad was under all that rubble. I knew he found a way out before the building fell. How would he breathe with all that dust and steel covering him? As the day wore on, people turned sulky, cantankerous. Some arguments flared up. There was lots of crying. I'd never seen so many teary-eyed, sobbing adults in my 9-year-old life. That night there was a prayer vigil at our house. Father Patty organized the gathering for just after sunset. It was chilly, in the low 50s, but there was a calmness in the air that gave it beauty. More than 100 people showed up, all holding candles and trampling our massive front lawn. Some friends and family, and lots of people I didn't know. It felt like half the town had shown up. Father Patty said a few words, then a prayer, and another prayer. And when he took a breath, someone started reading the names of the missing. My family gathered on the front porch. Each of us held a lit candle, and we listened to the names, pronounced slowly, loudly, enunciating each syllable. All of a sudden, the dark sky was brightened with lightning and a single burst of thunder. I learned years later that in that moment, my mom felt something and accepted that my dad was safe. She turned to Grandpa, whispered he's not coming home. On Friday, I woke early, ran down to the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and called my father's cell. Earlier that year, he'd lost 38 pounds, mostly from pumping iron before work at a gym. I later learned this was called the Fitness Company, member number WTC 18221, adjacent to the Marriott Hotel and next door to the North Tower. He was in great shape, muscly. He looked to me like a young Arnold Schwarzenegger, the early version in movies like Commando, in which Arnold played a retired Delta Force operator. Even as I dialed, I pictured my father, strong, athletic, even brawny, trapped beneath 1,000,000 tons of rubble, all that splintered wood and sheet metal and asbestos and watches and wedding rings. I imagined him climbing upward through the rubble, pushing chunks of concrete and rebar and bits of office furniture out of the way so he could get up and out of the heap. He'd follow the sunlight, hold his breath so he didn't gag on the dust and smoke, and he'd reach the top of some jumble of twisted metal and take a big breath of air. Then he'd make his way to West Street or Vesey Street or one of the other streets that bordered the World Trade Center complex. He'd find Greenwich Street and walk north against traffic, and he'd keep walking, blocks and blocks, and I don't know. Maybe he'd board the PATH train and zoom under the Hudson River to Hoboken, then on to Journal Square where he left his car. He'd climb into his Porsche, a silver 911 Carrera, and race home. Any minute now, he'd walk in the door covered in dust. He'd stink of smoke. Oh, and he'd have a box in his hand from Lenny's Pizza over in Bernardsville, half cheese, half pepperoni, like he carried into our house each Friday night for as long as I could remember. Dad, please. Please come home. We miss you, and I want you to come home. Can we drive in the Porsche when you get home? It's Matthew. Okay, I love you. I played this idea of Arnold Dad over and over in my head, elaborating, adding details, and changing tiny elements of the story. I needed the narrative to make sense. I took it a step further, reenacting the scene with my younger brothers Nick and little 3-year-old Mike. One of us would be Dad, the other's a fireman or a cop, or maybe a good Samaritan. Whoever chose the role of fireman would put on ski pants, baggy nylon overalls that resembled the heavy yellowish bunker gear worn by real firefighters. When I was Dad, I'd lay on the ground surrounded by fragments of the old towers, pillows and blankets and tipped-over chairs and whatever else was nearby, and I'd lay there shouting for help as Nick and Mike dug me out. "Hurry," I'd say. "I don't have long. Faster, faster." "We're moving as fast as we can," Nick would say. "Move faster. Stop shouting at me. I'm under here." Each time we reset the game, we'd argue over who would play Dad. And each time we started over, we'd make the pile of rubble a little higher, a little more complex, more pillows, more couch cushions, some cardboard boxes from the garage, stacked so they might tip over at any moment. 2. I was only 9 years old, but I knew what death was. It was the end. When it came to my dad, though, no amount of rational thought could outweigh my feelings. I watched the footage over and over again, trying to validate my hopes and dreams, believing there was a minute possibility he made it out of the building alive. And when the day came that I was told my dad wasn't coming home ever again, it just initiated a new, deeper search for answers. His death was just the beginning. On Tuesday, September 18th, 2001, 2 cars eased up the drive. I stopped playing football with Nick in the foyer and watched through the narrow front window as a police car and a dark black Nissan turned into our driveway and moved tentatively forward and parked. 4 people got out. Mr. Daly, a local police officer, a man and woman in spiffy dark suits who looked like they belonged in Men in Black, and Father Paddy O'Donovan from the church we attended, Church of Christ the King in New Vernon, who was close friends with my father. Father Paddy came over for dinner at our house with my grandparents one time. He and my dad drank red wine and made jokes the whole night that guaranteed I couldn't stop laughing. I had wanted to stay up late with him, but my father finally gestured for Nick and me to go to bed with his sarcastic, "Time for B-E-D, bed," phrase. Now, Grandma Laura appeared in the foyer and said, "Matthew, Nicholas, go upstairs." "What's going on?" I asked. "Now," she said. "But Father Paddy—" Her face was pink. She pointed up the stairs and shouted, "Go up!" Then turned and shouted even louder, "Michelle?" Nick and I trudged up the stairs, stopped on the landing, and sat where we could see part of the front door. Even before the men knocked, Grandma opened the door. My mother had appeared in the foyer, patting down her shirt, pushing hair out of her tired face. Grandma stood behind her, nudged my mother forward, but held onto one arm. I could see a man's pant legs. "Mrs. Bocchi?" "Michelle?" I knew the voice. Officer Daly, soft-spoken, no wasted words. We lived in a small town, a township of 700 people or so with a handful of police officers. Everyone knew the man in charge. Mom said, "Tell me you found him." "These men here with me." Officer Daly paused, couldn't get out the words. "They've identified John's remains." Then my mother shrieked, or squealed, the sound our dog Fritzy would make when we stepped on her tail by accident. "No!" she screamed, her body sliding down the edge of the dining room wall. Grandma helped her up and squeezed her tight, her face flushed and sprinkled with tears. Father Patty stepped forward. "Michelle, we're very sorry." Mom composed herself. "Remains?" she asked. One of the prosecutors, I think, cleared his throat and said, "The toothbrush and hair samples you provided, they're a match to your husband's DNA. I'm very sorry." "When?" she asked. "Pardon me?" "When did you find him?" All I could see was feet, but the feet shuffled around, one prosecutor looking at the other, conferring without saying a word. The one in front turned back to face my mother and said, "The 14th, Friday." "You said remains?" she asked again, her voice cracking. Officer Daly shuffled sideways for a moment, and I caught sight of a bowed head. The woman prosecutor stepped forward, whispering to my mom. "My understanding is they found his lower half." "What do I do?" "What am I supposed to do now?" my mother asked, her sobs overpowering her words. "Doyle Funeral Home is a great place. They are a very nice family. A lot of people in town use them," the woman prosecutor remarked. I had never seen my mom cry that way before, and I knew something serious had happened. What exactly, I didn't know. Maybe my dad was in the hospital and badly hurt or something, or maybe they had to cut one of his legs off because he broke it so badly. He was definitely still alive. I knew that for sure. Not long after, my mother found Nick and me sitting on one of the steps near the top of the stairs. She glanced up at us, her eyes red. She waved her hand. "Come with me." "Where?" I asked. Too tired to argue, she turned and walked slowly down the hall. We followed her into my father's office at the end of the hall. She was first through the door, and I heard her footsteps loud and hard on the wooden floor. Another kind of wood on the walls, dark and grainless. The room was large, a big old school desk in the middle, a credenza pushed against the wall, and between them a red leather desk chair, tufted, with the buttons pushed deep into the leather. My father loved that chair. She said, "I have something to tell you." Then she stopped and looked around the room, kind of swiveled her body in a half circle, and in that moment, something let go inside, her body slumping or shrinking, getting smaller before my eyes. She'd been quiet so long. I asked, "What?" She said, "Go on," and gestured to the desk chair. Nick and I both wanted the red chair, so I sat, and Nick wrestled his way next to me. My mother glanced off again, maybe at old photographs on the shelf. She said, "Daddy isn't coming home." She turned and looked at Nick, then me, tears flooding down her cheeks. I didn't hear the words so much as feel them. I started to cry. Mom moved closer, down on her knees, leaning forward to hug me. Nick just sat there, a big question mark on his face, unable to take it all in. Finally, he said, "My dad's dead?" "Oh, honey," Mom said. "He isn't coming home?" She shook her head. "Ever?" Another shake. Then Nick hopped off the chair and walked out of the room. I sat there and cried with my mom for a bit. She didn't know what else to do besides hug me and kiss my head. The following morning, I called my father.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?